Can you see my screen? Luke, can you see my screen?
So this is not necessarily.
I can remove that easily. Easy.
Done. The less definition, the better.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today. My name is Madison Rawlings. I am the Director of Sustainability and Events here at Green Spaces. We're so grateful for you to spend this day with us. I know this weather was kind of looking rainy, but we're thrilled to have Ongeleigh Underwood. Can you hear me? Do you want me to turn it this way, Wayne? Got it. I'll hold it. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We are Green Spaces, and our mission is to advance the sustainability of living, working, and building in the greater Chattanooga region. And we do all of that through our abundance of programs. And we couldn't exist with supporters like you. I want to address one of those programs and get it on your calendar right now. The Chattanooga Green Prix is going to be October 20th and 21st out at Volkswagen. And I want to see you there. I want to see you coming out to support our students, coming out to visit, or if you want to become more involved, we are always looking for sponsors for this event. This is a workforce development program for elementary schoolers, middle schoolers, and high schoolers, and it teaches them how to design, build, and race their own electric vehicle. We have a rapidly shifting market for EVs, electric vehicles, in the Tennessee region. When we started this, there were 0 electric vehicle manufacturers in the state. We now have 4. So we are rapidly trying to prepare our students for this workforce. Can you hear me, Luke?
It's got to be the screen shared this page.
Oh, that's weird.
There's always something.
Always something. Can you see it now? That look good?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. You may have seen this in the news back in April, but the Climate Action Plan was passed, which is a huge piece of policy for our city moving forward on how we are going to sustainably plan for our future. They have shared with us, the city has shared with us that they will be putting together a committee of stakeholders, both internal and external. So if you want to be involved with that, give us a shout. We are keeping tabs on this and trying to make sure that everybody that wants to be involved with that is possible. We have our Empower program, which teaches no and low cost ways that homeowners and renters can lower their energy impact, and then they can save money so that they can spend that on the things that they need, their groceries, medicine, etc. I want to put another event on your calendar, Green Drinks. We host Green Drinks once a month at locations across the city. This month we will be over at Chambers Welding and Fabrication. Metal Makers is hosting their Green Drinks, and it will be from 5 to 7 p.m. on Wednesday, June 28th. And they're having an open house. You'll get to go and see their space. They host welding classes open to the public as well. Our Green Leader program just moved from UTC over to Chattanooga State. This is a professional development certificate open to anybody, no skill set in sustainability or having any sort of background is required. want to know more about sustainability in Chattanooga, how we got to the environmental state that we are in, and how to apply sustainable principles to your workplace or home, I highly recommend you check out this program and you can chat with me afterwards. Back in January, we shifted to our Green Business Directory for our Green Light program. And I would love for all of you to go onto our website and search the directory and find out the green businesses in the area so that you can spend your dollars that are at places that are trying to make a better impact on the environment. And we couldn't do all of this without our financial supporters either. Thank you to our founding partners, Franklin Architects and Compass Commissioning and Design. Our top members, Barry and Hunt, Scenic City Solar, Franklin Architects, and then we have Lotus, Grace Frank Group, Newterra, Rockridge, and Green Strategies. We have green level members. The membership starts $200 a year for nonprofits, $500 for for-profit businesses. And I want to give a shout out to our newest members that joined us, Freightology and WAP Sustainability, that just renewed. So please consider becoming a member if that's on an individual basis or at your business level. Some housekeeping items. Everything that you are eating on is compostable. The only thing that may not be, there's some floating condiment packets around here somewhere. So please throw those away, but your plates, napkins, cups, forks, everything is compostable. So help us keep that and our waste streams clean. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Ongeleigh Underwood, who works in climate solutions and carbon. She's currently the managing director of the Circular Carbon Network and the executive director of the Appalachian Carbon Exchange. So everyone, please give her a round of applause, and I look forward to hearing from her.
Thank you, Madison. Hi, everyone. How is everybody doing today? Good. So who's excited to learn about carbon? Yes. It's, oh, okay. Do you think I can like put it in here?
You can try.
Let's see. How's that? Yeah, good. All right. So I'm going to try to give a detailed yet general overview of sort of what the carbon cycle is, how carbon markets work, and how they incentivize action, climate action, and then talk a little bit about the nonprofit, the Appalachian Carbon Exchange, and the executive director, and the work that we do. So let's sort of take it from the top here. Carbon sequestration, basically taking carbon from the air and storing it in natural carbon sinks. Those can be biological sinks, geologic sinks, or geological sinks. And this can be accomplished through either a mechanized process, like I'm not sure if any of you guys have heard any of the news about the direct air capture plants that are coming on board. A lot of funding and attention is going through to that from the IRA Infrastructure Reduction Act, or nature-based processes, trees, agricultural soils, things like that, soil carbon, or combinations of the two, like biochar or bio oil. So just a quick environmental 101 here. The biological carbon cycle, it's one of the most important cycles here on Earth. Carbon is one of the most important elements on Earth. Our bodies are 18% carbon. Trees are 50% carbon. And the cycle supports life basically by transferring carbon between living things and the environment. And the carbon in our body, much like the water in our bodies, was once a part of the oceans, once a part of the air, the rocks, and the soil. Basically, carbon is taken up through the roots into trees, released into the atmosphere as oxygen. Photosynthesis is really the main catalyst for this in nature. It's deposited into the soil and the cycle continues again. Carbon on our planet is stored in different stocks all the way across the globe. The largest is in the Earth's mantle, and sedimentary rock in the continental crust and the upper mantle, formed over millions and millions of years. The second is in the oceans, where about 95% of that carbon is stored in deep ocean reserves. Then following, of course, are forest carbon, soil carbon, and permafrost stores the rest. Obviously, this cycle is a little bit out of balance right now. As atmospheric carbon continues to rise, we see how that if we need to keep the balance to a 1.5 degree centimeter temperature increase, we need about a 7 to 8% decrease in global emissions. The chart that you're looking at here is from the United Nations Environmental Program gap report, and it shows us at our current policy levels missing the targets by nearly doubling the amount of carbon emissions that we can afford this decade alone. So we look to our options for obviously emission reductions is the priority, but also for sequestration. There's an analogy that I like to use. It's essentially, you can think of carbon in the atmosphere as a bathtub, and the tap has been running a little hot for too long. And yes, we can turn the taps off. That is important so the bathtub does not overfill. But then we still have a bathtub full of water that needs to be drained. So we need to pull the drain and drain the carbon as well. So that's where we start looking at sequestration and carbon removal as a solution for that. Let's see here. We're going to go over geologic sequestration. So this is the top left corner. This is essentially a map by the U.S. Geological Survey and assessing the total potential for basalt rock sequestration. Essentially, there are carbon that is captured, like direct air capture machines that capture carbon out of the air. Point source capture that takes carbon off of flue gas tops and things like that before it is emitted. That carbon has to go somewhere. So there's these deep injection wells where it is basically gets trapped into minute pores and spaces, and eventually mineralizes into rocks. So this map really shows the potential for basalt sequestration in the United States. The majority of the opportunity for this lies in China, Russia, and the United States. Let's see, oceanic carbon. This NOAA map on the top right shows the increase in human-produced carbon absorbed in the oceans, about 36% above average. This was measured in 2017. Obviously, this affects the acidity and overall chemistry of the ocean in a major way. Everything is connected. This is where you hear of reef die-offs and coral reef die-offs and complete change in the chemistry of life in the oceans. Oceanic, but the good news here is that oceanic carbon removal it's growing. It's a very popular solution right now in the investment world. And overall, there's a lot of attention being given to it. So that looks like maybe kelp farming, a huge sequester of carbon. And that gets utilized and turned into different products, especially for cow feedstocks, algae, microalgae products, ocean filtering, and more solutions, more very exciting solutions. The forests absorb carbon, obviously, via photosynthesis, and they store it above and below ground in biomass and in soil. Forests account for about 92% of terrestrial biomass, or terrestrial biomass stores carbon, basically in deep layers. Can't see.
Sorry, it's not liking.
Did everybody hear me okay, or am I not speaking properly? It's a very dark.
Not able to see you online right now, so we're just gonna do it from these slides if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then agricultural soils. There's different techniques you can use in agriculture to help store the carbon in deep layers in the soil. like no-till agriculture, and implementing cover crops, intercropping, grassland restoration, silvopasturing, agroforestry, rotational grazing, all kinds of things. We could probably talk about that all day. So how much is a ton of carbon? You're basically looking at a 2-story, 2,000 square foot house. That is 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide in gaseous form. The average American is responsible for about 10 of these a year. An average American family of 4, about 25. And then if you want to start talking about how in our region, in the Southeast, in the US, what is an acre of forest sequester? That is a very common question I get. You know, what are we looking at here? And you can think about it as about every decade, an acre of forest sequesters anywhere from 40 to 60 tons of carbon, metric tons of carbon. And then this chart here is really just talking about the mitigation potential of reforestation and all kinds of different, some of the different techniques to increase carbon drawdown in nature-based solutions. So how do we do more of this? How do we finance carbon drawdown? Carbon offsets are a way to create value to enable the development of sequestration projects that reduce and remove emissions. I'm not sure if you're able to see this too well, but essentially there's different ways to think about the storage of these carbon, in a way that is it something that is essentially changing a molecule, like landfill methane capture, that's essentially flaming the methane that comes out of a landfill, turning it into carbon, to a less potent greenhouse gas, but it's not storing it necessarily anywhere. It's not taking it out of the atmosphere. There's short-term storage. A lot of your forestry is in this category, wetland restoration, and reforestation and afforestation, regenerative ag, some of those natural solutions I've been speaking of. And then there's the long-term storage, which is really that in situ mineralization, the deep well injections for that captured carbon. And what makes a high quality carbon offset? You know, anyone with a keyboard these days can Google what is a carbon offset and get 100 Bloomberg articles that talk about, you know, poor quality carbon offsets and the problems of the system. And yes, there are problems in the system, but there are a lot of high quality carbon offsets out there. And there's a lot, and this category is only growing because there's so much scrutiny and focus in this particular field. So what makes a high quality carbon offset? A lot of things, but this is your baseline. Additionality. Is the project going to go, will it work? Will it go forward without this financing? Basically, will it exist without the revenue from the carbon offsets? That's your number one test. Number two, is it verifiable? There's this term called MRV. Is it monitored, reported, and verified by credible third party or multiple parties? What is the permanence of this carbon? Will it reduce or remove carbon that will essentially play into the system and store it for as long as you say it's going to be stored for? Is it measurable? How is it measurable? You know, using scientific data and methodologies that are recognized and respected. And then it avoids leakage. So that basically means if you do some action here, will it result in the same action being taken somewhere else? So if essentially you're saying, you know, we're not cutting down these trees, we're going to avoid harvest of these trees, will that essentially shift the market to a different area where they will, you know, harvest the timber? And if it does do that, that you're accounting for that leakage in your calculation of tonnage. So there's two different types of carbon markets. There's the compliance market. Right now, the European Union is working on generally in this that realm. California is also operating under a compliance market. And then there's a voluntary carbon offset market. Right now, that's essentially where a lot of energy and attention is being put. So roughly how that works is you have an organization that's going to commit to net zero. That means, okay, by 2050, we want to have a net zero accounting of our greenhouse gases. And to do that, we need to plan 10, 20, 30 years ahead. But we might not be able to reduce all of those emissions. The first thing to do is to reduce as an organization. So if that means taking your refrigerator, your refrigeration system, and getting on the maintenance schedule for, let's say, 2040 to transition your refrigerants to a zero emission refrigerant, that's great. So it's on the calendar, you've planned for it, and it's in the budget. But until 2040, you essentially have a refrigerator that is going to be producing carbon. And so that's kind of where offsets come in. While you're going down the curve and you're heading towards your net zero goal, you have offsets to help you get to zero while you're doing that, because it's hard to snap your fingers and just have no emissions in this world. So essentially, this organization does all that planning, then they purchase the offsets that avoid emissions or remove it directly from the atmosphere. Those projects can include many, many things that we've talked about: forest conservation, reforestation, methane capture, regenerative agriculture, a whole slew of things, and it's a very fast-growing industry. And then that offset, which is serialized typically, is retired on the name of the purchasing organizations so that it cannot be reused or resold. So now I'm going to sort of switch to speaking about the Appalachian Carbon Exchange and what it is that we're doing. We're a regionally based nonprofit. We catalyze high quality nature-based carbon projects with a focus on regional communities. Our current and first project is a forestry project. It's an improved forest management project. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how those forestry projects are typically developed. Essentially, you have over there on the left, you have a relationship between project developers who are basically technical expertise, technical service providers, and the landowner. Typically in this situation, your landowner has anywhere from 10,000 to 100,000 acres that they're interested in enrolling in the project. Those project developers work with the landowners and a lot of third-party forest inventory, foresters and verifiers and validators to then submit the project to the registries. The registries then certify it, put the rubber stamp on it, they review it, and then it is sold to basically either an end buyer or a broker. What we do as the Appalachian Carbon Exchange, we serve as the project proponent and the owner. So essentially we act as an aggregated landowner. This allows us to engage with landowners of much smaller size. So when, again, typically if you have 200 acres of land or 500 acres of land, getting your own project is pretty hard. And there's some other options out there right now for that, but I can talk a little bit about the benefits of what we bring to the table here in a bit. But essentially we aggregate all those landowners. So right now we have 4 and we're growing very fast into one project. So we are essentially the risk taker. We act as the landowner and we contract with all of our individual landowners to pull all of those landowners together into one modeling system. We also have a technical service provider that does all the methodology work. And then we submit to the registries to get that certified. And we're also excited to be engaging new buyers into the market regionally. Certainly something that we're just sort of starting our journey there, but we've successfully engaged a buyer for our first cohort, a manufacturer in Dalton. And we'll be excited to announce that whole project and what that entails, hopefully here in the early fall. But essentially, yeah, we're bringing new buyers onto the market, facilitating those transactions and trying to keep it all close to home. Our goal is to get everything within a day's drive. And right now we're in less than half a day's drive. We're within 100 miles from the forest to the emitters, the manufacturing plant. So again, just a review here, for landowners, we reduced the barrier for entry for smaller landowners. We're really targeting smaller landowners here that might not have an opportunity to engage in the marketplace, to restrict their timber and really get paid for that. And there's no out-of-pocket costs to the landowner, something that we internalize. We also manage the project for the full 40 years. It's a 40-year commitment. So we manage the cost integration and essentially the administration of the project for the full 40 years as an organization and take that burden off of the landowner. And then we're here, so we can meet for coffee, talk about things, go visit the land, and we're always available. So for buyers, it's a high integrity, nature-based solution with a developer, technical service provider that's really well respected. We are a community model and we foster relationship building with landowners. It's definitely a big part of what we're doing. And we're an independent nonprofit. Always does that. So yeah, just to sort of drive it home, we believe in the power of place. We're a big Southern Appalachia fans. We're rooted here and always will be. We want to foster the growth of landscape scale climate projects and build climate investments and relationships that stay close to home. Our goals over the next 3 to 4 years is to enroll 20,000 acres of forest into our project, to reforest 5,000 acres, and to continue to nurture strong community and corporate partnerships through some of our programs that we're developing. Our structure, this is sort of the last slide here. Our structure is, we are a nonprofit LLC. So that means that we're an LLC that's owned by a nonprofit, the Tennessee River Gorge Trust. But we do maintain autonomy and discretion with an independent board. For now, we do have hopes and dreams of becoming our own nonprofit eventually. So yeah, we have a growing list of partners and we're always looking to have conversations and to grow. So let me know if you want to talk more. And here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out. And I'm happy to take questions and I'll do my best to answer them. Yes.
Okay, so this might sound like a dumb question, but what is methane?
So methane, essentially, in the form that I was discussing it's an emission product of a landfill, a capped landfill. A methane accumulates in the bottom, and so there's a vent for that. They build that into the landfill infrastructure, and so there's project developers that go and they install basically flames. So they flame the methane and it turns it from methane into carbon dioxide. And so there's an equivalent because methane is about 25% more potent than carbon dioxide. So there's an equivalent there of basically carbon reduction, greenhouse gas reduction. A lot of times carbon get mistaken for greenhouse gases. It's really greenhouse gas reduction. Yep.
Yeah. So, as far as like searching for, sort of being that intermediary between the registry and the buyers, do the buyers already exist, or is it part of y'all's mission to sort of seek out buyers in projects?
Well, our first buyer, we're excited that this is their first purchase. So we're really happy to engage with them in this process for the first time. They've been through a very extensive greenhouse gas analysis. They've been through an extensive planning process. They know what they need to get to zero. And we're helping them bridge that gap and get to that solution. We are not specifically focused on helping businesses get that plan in place. There's a lot of great people, including Green Spaces and WP Sustainability and green strategies that do that. But we essentially are there to help sort of at that last mile, because buying offsets is really the last step in the process for businesses. Mm-hmm. Yep.
What kind of revenue do you have? 5,000, 2,000?
Yeah, that's a very popular question and a very complicated answer. So this is the nascent market. It's a volatile market. It is a market that will continue to be around, and we only see it growing. But at the end of the day, there's two variables that we're talking about here. One is the amount of tons that forest sequesters, and we don't know that until we get out to the land and we take a look at it. And we can give, we basically do estimates to see what we think this forest will basically generate over a 40-year period. And then the other variable is the price that we get per offset. And that's nothing that we guarantee, but we certainly, as a part of our process, can provide ranges. So it's really, like I said, typically in the Southeast, what you see is 40 to 60 tons an acre. That's over a 10-year period. But that's going to vary depending on the age of the forest, the species mix, and a few other variables that we take into account. There's third-party certifiers out there, and that's essentially what our technical service provider helps us to arrange. If we just go quickly through the process, we provide an estimate, come out to visit the forest, take a look, make sure everything's, is something that you're interested in, is something that, we think is feasible to incorporate into the project. And then we get a contract signed and we go into inventory. So we really start spending a bulk of the money is getting into the forest inventory, running plots on that forest and all the other forests in the cohort. And then at that point, that data is analyzed and it's sent to validators. Validators are a third-party certifier certifying the work of the developer and the forester. And then there's a verifier that comes behind that on behalf of the registry that verifies randomly the plots. So there's a lot of different third parties that are involved in this process. We're making a product out of thin air. Basically, we're selling carbon offsets as a product. And so we want to make sure that that measurement, verification, and reporting is done properly. And that's part of the system. And only then are the registries putting their rubber stamp on it. So it's start to finish, it's about 18 to 24-month process. Yeah, go ahead.
So as you're growing the forest and utilization, whatever it's out. So you're not necessarily you're saying we have this on the road, but that doesn't mean you're in a plan. So the timber could be cut and replanted, right? If it's, if it goes into lumber, it goes into paper or something like that. This, what happens there? It come back and replant. So is this does it necessarily lock up the timber as a plan? Or is there a plan where it's harvested and reproduced?
Our particular approach is a 0% harvest situation, and that's for 40 years.
Okay, so you basically lock up the plan for any kind of revenue stream except for the carbon.
I mean, it's a case-by-case basis. 0 to 10% would be about where we sit on that. Go ahead.
So you mentioned that the businesses that are purchasing the credits have to be targeting net zero. Is that an actual requirement?
No.
Process?
No.
I guess what I'm wondering is what checks are there to just ensure that there's not businesses like high greenhouse gas emitting folks out here just greenwashing by purchasing the credits?
Right. I mean, that does happen. Certainly not something that we are actively engaged in. That's sort of more of a watchdog organization. There's several different organizations like SBTI, Science-Based Target Initiatives, GRI standards that these organizations will abide by in their accounting of carbon. And they set out, the 200-page documents that really run through the nuts and bolts of accounting for your first, second, and third scope emissions. And then, once you have that picture, then, it's essentially that's what you use to say, okay, we need this, we have 100,000 tons that we can't account for this year. We need to buy 100,000 tons. Any organization that's going through those steps and processes and are using those standards will have all of this material published in sustainability reports. Now, what level or, how that's done, I mean, it's not mandated, right? This is a voluntary system. So it's certainly happening, but there's also a lot of people doing it the right way. So I think it's just a case-by-case basis.
One of the questions I get asked a lot is, how do you know people aren't double dipping? Or that you aren't saying business A is getting this tract of land for their carbon offset, and business B is also getting this tract of land. Can you share that again?
Absolutely. So it's not necessarily tied to the tract of land, it's tied to the verified metric ton. And the whole process I described of inventory, validation, verification, issuance, every ton gets a serial number attached to it through the registries, and those are publicly available. Anyone can look them up. I mean, it's a little cumbersome, but you can look it up as to like the sales that's going on all the different Vera and American Carbon Registry right now. And essentially, once they're sold, they're sold. Once those serial numbers are retired, we go through that process of retiring them on behalf of the client or the buyer. And once they're retired, they're retired. They cannot be resold. I mean, that's part of one of the tick points for high quality. Really, it's actually like a baseline for anything right now. I mean, there's a lot more harder things to do than to make sure that they're not double counted, if that makes sense. So that's an easy one to tick off. Yes.
Two questions. As far as corporate partnership, you mentioned about a company in Dalton, the manufacturer in Dalton, Georgia. Is there a geography cutoff for you guys as far as who you're partnering with?
I mean, from a buyer perspective, absolutely not. I mean, we really want to stay in the Southeast, but we've been speaking with corporates in Nashville, Atlanta, Asheville, even over in Raleigh. Our footprint is roughly Southern Appalachia, Cumberland, the foothills, essentially the Piedmont area, all of that. We're steadily going to be continuing to move further into, further east and further north into the Appalachians. But right now, the Southern Appalachians is really where we're focused. But yeah, it can get really complicated from a corporate perspective because a lot of corporates have footprints everywhere, especially if it's like an online business. And so there's different ways to account for that.
And then my second question was, I'm going to assume that the land that you guys secure, you made sure that when it carbon offsets is the highest and best use. We want to make sure, so I represent a company, I'm here representing the company I work for. And so we want to make sure that we wouldn't be securing land should be that's foreign land. We get asked that question, are you taking food out of people's mouth by securing offsets, we working with your program. How do you navigate that conversation when you're that the carbon offsets that you're securing with these land, particular land, that's the highest and best use of it, and not being used in the form of a farmland, some type of agricultural.
Okay. That's a narrative that I think can be really approached by looking at the overall market development, the development trends in the Southeast. And we're losing farmland to development faster than we're losing forest to farmland. So it's a bit of more of a macroeconomic answer. And we believe that the forest lands that we're working with specifically are a lot of times more mature. And the idea of, and a lot of times also, on some sort of topography as well, that would make it challenging for agriculture. But overall, if you look at the trends of development, and we're actually in the middle of authoring several white papers that do discuss the market. What am I trying to say? Basically the development threats of the region. I mean, I think we can all see that over the last 3 or 4 years here in Chattanooga alone, I mean, the incredible rush of growth, which is great, but also it's a little scary. There's just a lot, we're sort of slowly becoming a part of Nashville and Atlanta in so many different ways. And so we're really looking at that closely, and we're developing some white papers specifically looking at that and making sure that we're accounting for that in this story that we're telling. I don't know if that answers your question specifically. It's a complicated question for sure. Hey.
Speaking in the kind of broader conversation with language or messaging around carbon changing from something that's been vilified maybe or something that's more about abundance and about resource at all.
I think you will always have naysayers. I mean, you've got folks that are media agencies out there that are really hard pressed to get that narrative out there that, nature-based offsets are, they're a waste of time, or everyone has their own, that we should be focusing on emission reductions, and that offsets alone, really shouldn't be a part of it because it's a Band-Aid, it's an excuse, right? But really, when it's done properly, what you're doing is changing corporate budgets. You're changing the way that capital is allocated. You're incorporating externalities, basically. That's sort of the process of how I view what we're doing here with carbon. And I think that's becoming more and more forefront because a huge trend we saw last year was a focus on measurement, reporting, and verification. I mean, everyone is really frustrated that we don't have a common language. We don't have terminology that makes sense to everyone or that's used across the board. I mean, there's a lot of terms that get jumped around and used in different ways, and it's confusing, right? So there's a lot of talk and a lot of movement towards getting to that point in time, and there's a lot of really smart people working on it. So I think we're only going to see more and more respect in this world, and looking towards, basically the carbon markets in general, and especially carbon removal as a solution, as a really viable solution, because the scale we're at with removal is just a pittance to where we need to be. And everyone's really focused on getting it right now. So yeah, it's interesting. I think climate can be, it's almost like a clean slate to think about doing things the right way. I mean, and you see a lot of environmental justice and climate change conversations happening, and there's just a lot of ways to do this right, and that's what I choose to focus on anyways.
The drilling and putting the carbon back in the earth. I imagine that must be so expensive.
It does.
Yeah, how does that compare for somebody that's trying to, I don't know, is that really more like a point source thing, or, yeah, I don't know my question.
It is very expensive. I mean, even 3 years ago, direct air capture credits were about over $1,000 a ton. And 3 years ago, just for comparison's sake, a forestry credit might have gone for $6 or $8. So, those carbon removal solutions are getting down that cost curve is really what a huge focus right now in the market. You're seeing those advanced market commitments by like Stripe and the Frontier Climate Group. I don't know if anyone's aware of that. It's really interesting. They're basically doing advanced purchasing of these removals so they can help get this technology down the cost curve. But yeah, it is incredibly expensive and laborious. And a lot of people think, why are we focusing on that? I mean, everyone's got their own opinion, right? But we're all a lot of smart people are really driving towards the right solutions, I think.
Do we have any other questions?
Any other questions?
All right. Well, everyone, I want to give Ongeleigh a round of applause for her time. And thank you all so much for coming today. We still have plenty of food, but something I mentioned earlier in the introduction is the Climate Action Plan. And the city of Chattanooga has a goal for net zero carbon emissions community-wide by 2050 in the Climate Action Plan. And so when we're talking about carbon offsets, the Appalachian Carbon Exchange and producers here in Chattanooga are really gonna have to start looking at their production over the next several years. Thank you for coming today. We hope to see you at Green Drinks. This was recorded, so I saw some of you taking pictures. It will be posted on our website later for you to go back and reference. But thank you, everyone, and have a great day.